want to start with the question of the age of the universe. If you open up a textbook today, if you Google it, I'm sure you'll find an answer somewhere between 12 or 17 billion years. That's when the Big Bang, so to speak, happened. That's when the creation of the world, of the universe, happened. The world that we live in today, planet Earth, is maybe 3.5 billion years old. And there's all kinds of, so to speak, evidence to prove this. They look at the glaciers, and they look at the ice samples, and they look at the carbon dating, and they look at the astronomy of how far the world is, and the conjecture is that, well, there was a point in time where it was just one little thing of mass that exploded, and you take the rate of this, how fast it's traveling, and you work backwards how long was it one compact piece, and you have 15.4 billion years or 13.8 billion years. What's 1.4 billion years amongst friends? It's nothing. 1.6 billion. It's nothing. So that's an interesting question, because it seems like if you ask me, what does the Torah say about how old the universe is? Well, there is no definitive Torah source on this. However, there's a simple way to work it out. You would take the creation, and you take Adam, and how old was Adam when his son was born? And how old was his son when his son was born? And we have generations, how old they were when their son was born. And we kind of add that up, and we have how many years was, from Adam to Abraham. So you just count the years, you have 1948 years from Adam to Abraham, from Adam's creation to Abraham being born. It's 20 generations, 1948 years. So you would assume, just reading simply, that Abraham was born at the year 1948 of creation from Adam. Now, what is not so clear is that there's no months, just years. So if Adam was maybe, I don't remember how old he was when his son was born. He was 130, whatever it was, but maybe it was a few more months, and you collect those months, maybe it was 1955. I don't know, but that's the basic framework of this idea. Well, how old was Abraham when Isaac was born? How old was Isaac when Jacob was born, and so on, and how old was till Moses, and eventually we have the timeline that takes shape, and the general consensus is that right now we're living in the year 5,779 since Adam, nearing at 6,000. So even if you want to round it up to a couple thousand, maybe we're at 5,800 if we didn't count correctly. But it's actually interesting, if you look at many Jewish books that date the year, it says the year, 5,000, let's say, 5,779, and then we'll say three letters, a lamed, a fei, and a kuf. And that's an acronym, which stands for Lefi Kabbalasenu, as per our tradition. Which means we're not saying it's a definitive timeline, it's a tradition, that's the traditional date, and that's the traditional years that we have. That's the basic outline of what we believe. So you look at it simply, we're talking about roughly around 6,000 years. And in fact, the Talmud goes on to tell us that the world will exist for 6,000 years, and then 7,000 years to be a different kind of world. And similar to you have Shabbos, you have 6 days of the week, and then one day of Shabbos, you have 6,000 years, and then 1,000 years, which is a different year, which is a different ethos, a different existence. And then you have maybe that repeats several times. There's the idea that there's 7,000 plus 7,000 plus 7 rounds of 7, just like you have the Shemitah cycle. You have every 6 years you work, 7 years you stop, and that goes on not just for 6 years, then it goes to 49 years, and then there's the 50th year. So there's another theme in that. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, that there's 6,000 plus 1 for a total of 50,000 years. But again, the numbers are very small compared to what the scientists are telling us with seemingly great confidence that the world is very old. It's in the billions, not even the thousands, not even the millions. It is the billions. So how do we reconcile that? Do we say they're wrong? Do we say that really it's not 6,000 years, or really it is 13 billion years, or we're just different? This is the science, this is the Torah, they're different. So I think there's at least 3 general approaches that I want to talk about, and maybe we'll expand it in our next session. So I think there's a very simple answer to this question. When Adam was created, did he have teeth to chew? Well, the answer is yes, because we know he ate some fruit. So he obviously had teeth, and this is the day that he was created. So on the day he was created, he has teeth. I know. I have several children. Thank God. They should live and be well. None of them were born with teeth. I did read, though, that I think 1 out of every 2,500 babies is born with some teeth. But even then, it's only 1 tooth. But you would imagine Adam was created. He wasn't created as a baby. He was created, as I just tell, he was created as an adult. So when the world was created, and when Adam was created, it wasn't created as a baby world. It was created as an advanced world. So maybe there were saplings, small little trees, but maybe there were big trees as well. It was a vibrant and existing world. It wasn't created as an infant, nascent world. So what would happen if you would cut down one of the trees, 100-foot cedar trees? How many reams would you find inside of it? Would you find no reams because it hasn't been around for you? Or maybe God created a vibrant, existing world. That's a very simple answer, is that maybe the world that God created was not a baby world, it was an advanced world. God created an old world. The world was already billions of years old, and the human experience, the Adam experience, that was only 6,000 years ago, but the world came into existence as already a very advanced world. And maybe there were people before Adam. That's, of course, a tantalizing question. You know, the Neanderthals were the other people, or humanoids of sorts. Again, that's details, but the general theme, one of the general approaches, is that the world is created as an existing world that could be viewed as being much older because it was created in advanced stages. That's one way to answer this. A second way to answer this question is that the world is really only 6,000 years old. And when I say 6,000, I mean 6,000. So why does it look to us to be older? Maybe there's other events, cataclysmic events, that caused artificial aging. So for example, we have the flood story of Genesis and of Noah. What does that do to the world? And how does it look post facto? Maybe all that carbon that was taken out of the rocks, well, maybe it has something to do with what happened to Noah. Maybe the deep sea fossils that we find in Kansas, it's not because of an ice age, it's because of the flood. It was all covered with flood water and deep sea fossils come. That's a theory. We know that the Talmud tells us that the species that interbred in the times of Noah didn't get a slot on the boat. And we know that 99% of species that have existed are already extinct. Well, maybe they went extinct then, not over the course of billions of years, but over the course of thousands of years, but they look a lot older once you throw in some curveballs, such as the flood and maybe other events like the Tower of Babel and the like, that did artificially, so to speak, accelerate the aging, or at least how it looks to us post facto. That's another branch of this subject. There is a third way to reconcile this question, and the general answer, and we're going to go through at least one of those specific answers today. Maybe we'll talk about some of the other angles in a future discussion, is that the world really is 5,779 years old, but there's also 6 days of creation, because the time only begins with Adam. We'll start counting with Adam. Adam is all the way at the end. He's at day 6. He's the very last thing to be created. What happened before him? That's 6 days. But what about these 6 days? We know these 6 days are not the way we would typically think of days, because we think of a day as the sun making its appearance again in our eastern horizon. That's a new day. That marks a new day. Well, the sun appears on day 4 of creation. So day 1 to day 2, there's something other than a constellation called the sun that marked this turnover from day 1 to day 2. What it was is a great mystery. We don't know the answer to that question, but it was something else. And we could prove from that this day is a different kind of day. What it's actually made a day, who knows? But that at least shows us at least a window to maybe start speculating that the days of creation were a little bit different than the days the way we typically think of them. In addition, Torah sources make it clear these are not any ordinary days. So, for example, Adam and Eve created on Friday, made it on Friday, produced 2 children on Friday. It's a pretty eventful Friday. The same day that you're created is the day we become parents. Twice over. Obviously, there's a different kind of existence that is present during those 6 days that are not necessarily portable to the way we view those 6 days. And therefore, the argument goes that it's not infeasible to suggest that when we look back on those 6 days, the way we currently calculate days, those days would look maybe like hundreds, thousands, millions, maybe even billions of years looking backwards. This idea was suggested in the 1960s by Rabbi Shimon Schwab, who was a German rabbi, survived the Holocaust and moved to Baltimore and eventually to Manhattan. And he was a very advanced scholar in the secular studies as well, brilliant writer, a great Torah scholar as well. And when the age of the universe became a major discussion, this was the general idea that he proposed. And there's an expansion that was presented in 1979 by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan, who was a rabbi and a physicist. He was one of the most promising physicists in America, but was someone who was also a huge, titanic scholar, not just of the revealed portions of the Torah, but especially the hidden portions of the Torah. Wrote many, many books on all kinds of subjects. Wrote primary translations of the Torah, a very fascinating character. Sadly, he died. He was very young. He was only 48 years old when he passed away in 1983. But in 1979, he gave a lecture to a group of scientists where he proposed a brilliant reconciliation based upon legitimate sources in Jewish literature of how our world and the way the scientists view it are really the same age. And I actually have a transcript of his speech, and I selected citations of this transcript to convey this brilliant idea. It's so clever, it's so brilliant, it's something you have to share. And of course, there's other angles to the discussion that hopefully we'll talk about next time. So he quotes a book called the Sefer HaTemuna. This is a Kabbalistic work. It is attributed to one of the Tanaim, one of the Mishnaic era sages, named Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana. It is quoted by many of the mainstream commentators like the Ramban. It is it is a book that is well established. It's certainly one that has been available to the reading public for hundreds of years, so it's not a recent apologetics. And he speaks about the idea of the Shemitah. Talmud tells us that the world will exist for 6,000 years, and then there's the 7,000th year, which is a different kind of existence. But the Sefer HaTemuna adds that that's just one cycle of many cycles. That really, it's like a Yovel, 50, but it's 50,000. Just like there's 6,000 and then the 7,000th, there's 7 cycles of that 7,000 years, totaling 49 plus the 50th year, which is the ultimate rest day, so to speak. And thus, the world, it's not just a 6,000 year world plus a 7,000 year, it's 7 rounds of that, which is 49,000 plus a 50,000 years, 50,000 years. Okay. So the major question that we have to discuss is, okay, so if we're living in these cycles, which cycle are we in right now? Are we in the first Shemitah cycle, year 1,000 to 7,000? Are we in the second, 7 to 14, 14 to 21? 21 to 28, 28 to 35,000, 35 to... Which one are we in right now? So that's a discussion, and he brings several opinions. One opinion says it's the second cycle. One opinion says it is the 4th cycle. And then he brings the Sefer Livnas HaSaper. Again, these are very obscure. These are very esoteric sources, but these are legitimate sources that are reputable. These are not cockamamie stuff. He quotes the Sefer Livnas HaSapir, which says that right now we're in the 6th cycle, meaning where the world is 42,000 years plus. We're in the 42,000 to 49,000 cycle. And he goes on to, in this lecture, he does go on several tangents where he tries to explain, he tells stories. I selected the citations to try to keep it tight so we can follow his story. He's dancing around the problem that this Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a very dicey territory. Does the Arizal agree with this? Does the Arizal, of course, is the great codifier of Kabbalah. It seems like he disagreed with this. Can we really go with it? Who is it quoted by? Regardless, he wants to say that because this is a matter of what's called hashkafa, philosophy, it's not about halacha, even if the Arizal disagrees with it, it's still something we could discuss and we could still ponder. He goes on to say that the Radbaz, who was the generation prior to the Arizal in the end of the 15th and early 16th century, he was someone who wrote a commentary on the Sefer HaTemuna, which means he obviously held it in high esteem, and therefore it is a legitimate position. And then he goes on to talk about the Midrash. The Midrash says there's an amazing payoff at the end here, I promise. The Midrash goes on to say that God created universes and destroyed them. Again, I want to just make this disclaimer clear as possible. We're talking right now way, way, way above my knowledge and certainly my pay grade. So I'm just reading this citation because it's germane to our subject, and it's very fascinating, and it's very brilliant, and it's very clever, as we shall see. But I'm kind of go through his progression the way he did it. So there's a midrash that says God created universes and destroyed them. And what does that mean? Is that actual universes? Is that spiritual universes? It seems like the Arizal says, and again, the Arizal is the name for Kabbalah. He seems to go that it is spiritual worlds. However, there are others that say, no, we have this 6,000 plus 1, 7,000 year cycle. Maybe there's a 7,000 year cycle, and there's a destruction. And there's another 7,000 year cycle, another destruction, another 7, etc. And it seems like some of the commentaries, they explain that this midrash, this very cryptic midrash, God creates worlds and creates universes and destroys them and starts from scratch, that is in line, that is dovetailing with the Sefer HaTemuna of the 7,000 year blocks of existence. And he's acknowledging that even though it's not clear that everyone agrees, but there is definitely opinions that do seem to agree with that. In addition, the Talmud, for example, says, and you read this is in the Talmud, you don't have to go to the Midrash to read this, to encounter this idea. The Talmud, the book of Shabbos, page 88b, tells us that Moses went to heaven to negotiate the acceptance of Torah for the Jewish people, and the angels were totally befuddled at his appearance there. And they say to God, what is this earthling doing here? He has no business doing here. Well, I'm going to give him the Torah. You can give him the Torah? To this man? The Torah that you have with you, this is the critical line, 974 generations before you created the world. You're going to give that to humanity? That's what the Talmud says in the book of Shabbos, page 88b. What does it mean that the Torah was created 974 generations before the world was created? Didn't we just say the world was created and time was created? What is this idea that there are generations that precede the world? 974 is a very specific number. And the commentaries add, as a side note, how many generations were there from Adam to Moses? Well, there's 20 generations from Adam to Abraham. And Abraham has a son Isaac. And Isaac has a son Jacob. And Jacob has a son Levi. And Levi has a son Kahas. And then we have, of course, Amram, Moses. 6 generations, 26. 26 plus 974, exactly 1,000. And it quotes the verse that God does kindness. God does kindness for 1,000 years. There's 1,000 years from the creation of Torah till it's been given to mankind. But again, we could be talking like this We can study this, and we really have no idea what we're talking about. But what we do know for sure is that the Talmud says that the Torah was created 974 generations before the world was created. What does that even mean? That the world, before it was created, there was the Torah that existed 974 generations prior. So again, he wants to suggest, based upon the sources, quoting the source, Ma'areches Elokus, which by the way means the system of God or godliness. It's a pretty ambitious title. So he says that this idea of 974 generations before the world, that's referencing a previous Shemitah cycle, going along with this opinion of the Sefer HaTemunah. And he goes on to list many other sources that either are alluding to it or are explicitly talking about it. Rabbeinu Bachai, Rekanti, Sefer HaChinuch. He says the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra, they seem to allude to it. There is the book called the Tiferes Yisrael, one of the commentaries on the Mishnah. He talks about it. He writes that there was a lecture that he wrote called the Drush Orach Chaim, which means the lecture or the discourse of the light of life, that was taken out of the books because they thought it was inappropriate. They thought he was writing about Darwin, even though he wrote it in 1834, which preceded Darwin. It's omitted. Anyhow, it's a very meandering part of the lecture because he's trying to give credence to this idea found in a Kabbalistic book that's 700 years in circulation, but attributed to Rabbi Nechuna ben Hakana. Regardless, he wants to suggest as follows. This is point number one. Point number one is that the existence of the world and the existence of the universe is in 7,000-year blocks, and according to one opinion at least, we're in the final block, which means that the creation of this current world is 42,000 years after the earliest creation. That's all. So the world is 42,000 years old, more or less, plus 5,779. But he adds another ingredient to this wrinkle. He adds another ingredient to this cauldron by quoting Rabbi Yitzchak de Min Akko. Rabbi Yitzchak from Akko. Akko is a city in northern Israel, and Rabbi Yitzchak de Min Akko from Akko, he was a colleague of the Ramban. And in fact, when the Zohar was discovered, and there were questions about its legitimacy, the person that was sent to investigate it was Rabbi Yitzchak de Min Akko. He was a great Kabbalist. He's quoted by many of the traditional works of Kabbalah, and he adds another point which brings this home. He agrees with the opinion of the Sefer HaTemunah, meaning that it's 7,000-year blocks, but then he adds that when we talk about this, we're not talking about standard days, we're talking about godly days. What is the difference between a standard day and a godly day? So there's a verse. The verse tells us that one day for God is like 1,000 years for us. And here comes the payoff. When we say the world is 42,000 years old, we're not saying 42,000 years of our years. We're saying 42,000 years of God's years. Well, how long is a year of God? Well, if each day is 1,000 years for us, that means each year of God is how many years for us? What's the answer? 365,250. Because each year is 365 and a quarter days. And therefore, each year for God, how many years is that for us? Is 365 and a quarter thousand. So 365,250. That's each year. So what happens if you multiply 365,250 by 42,000? Drum roll, please. 15 billion years. Mind's blown. Mind's blown. And I'll read you a quote here, just to read it from his. This is again, it's a transcript. According to Livnus HaSaper, the most authoritative interpretation of the Sefer Tzmuna, we are now in the sixth Shemitah. When Adam was created, the world was 42,000 years old. But before Adam was created, we do not use human years, but divine years. Therefore, the age of the universe is 42,000 divine years. As we've seen earlier, one divine year is 365,250 human years. Therefore, the age of the universe is 42,000 times 365,250 human years. Make the calculation, you see it comes out that the universe is close to 15 billion years old. This is an interesting figure. For most calculations made on the basis of the expanding universe and other aspects of cosmology, this is precisely the age of the universe given by science. And yet, this figure is given in Torah sources over 700 years old. No apologetics here. And again, this is an amazing bit of scholarship that he takes one opinion of the idea of the Shemitah, the Sefer Tzmuna, and then one opinion of that, which is the sixth, that we finished the sixth cycle, we're in the seventh cycle, 42,000 years, and then adding that wrinkle from the Rabbi Yitzchak ben Akro that it's not talking about human years, it's God years, and then voila, what do you end up with? You end up with a world that in human years is 15 billion years old. Now I want to add, it's so clever, and it's so brilliant that you have to say it. You have to just repeat it over. Most people are not aware of this, by the way, I'm going to add. This is something that most people don't know of this calculation. But there are other answers that are legitimate. Again, we're not saying this is definitive, and we don't feel like we need to bend over backwards to accommodate the scientists. Remember, for 2,400 years, they were with Aristotle, the world's eternal. And then comes along the 1950s, 1960s, and that changes everything. Finally, they're agreeing to Torah. We don't feel like we need to contort ourselves to accommodate them. Let them accommodate us. We have yet been proven wrong. They've been proven wrong repeatedly, but it's still something that it's worthy to wrestle with. And I think it is interesting that we find in ancient sources this formulation that the world is 15 billion years old. Not to say that this is the only Jewish perspective on the subject, but it is definitely noteworthy to share when we're talking about this subject. And again, we look forward to in the future, next time, to talk more about this, about maybe some of the other perspectives on this very interesting question and dilemma, and maybe also get into what the Torah would say on the theory of evolution, namely that things evolve from other things. Is that compatible with Torah? Surely that's a fascinating question to ponder.